"Just kill me fast," the woman hissed, her voice barely carrying over the whistling wind that swept through the abandoned canyon. Ronan Blackwood, a solitary figure hunched atop a ridge, tightened his grip on the worn leather reins of his horse. The sun had just dipped below the jagged cliffs, casting a crimson glow that made the dry earth appear like a battlefield. The wind carried the stench of scorched sagebrush and blood, and somewhere down the canyon a creek gurgled faintly, its waters tainted with the dust of old crimes. He had seen death many times, but the desperation in her eyes was unlike anything he had witnessed. She was perched on a splintered wagon wheel, clutching her knees, trembling as if the wind itself could tear her apart. Her dark hair, streaked with dust and sweat, framed a face lined not by age but by suffering. Her name, if she even remembered to answer to it, was Mara, and she carried scars deeper than the sunburned landscape around them. "You've got the wrong canyon," Ronan said cautiously, spurring his horse closer. His voice was calm but carried authority. He didn't want to startle her, yet he needed answers. He had spent years roaming the West, tracking men who left violence in their wake, and something about her fear was familiar. Not in the face, but in the depth of terror, the same hollowed panic he had seen in other survivors of violent gangs. Mara's eyes flicked upward. Recognition, or maybe just hope, flared for a moment before extinguishing. "They said they'd kill me if I ran. If anyone saw me." Her voice cracked. "They branded me. They made sure I'd never be free." Ronan felt a chill run down his spine. "Branded?" His horse pawed the ground nervously as if sensing the gravity of the moment. She hesitated, then slowly lifted the hem of her ragged skirt. A blackened mark seared across her thigh in the shape of a jagged arrow. The edges were raw, angry, a permanent sign of ownership by a gang known only in whispers, the Iron Spurs. He had heard of them. Ruthless men who trafficked, tortured, and left survivors to wander in shame and fear. Few lived to tell the tale. Few dared to fight back. Ronan dismounted, careful not to frighten her. "I can help you," he said, "but you have to trust me." "Not many do. And I'm not a saint, Mara. I'm a man who knows how to deal with monsters." Her laugh was hollow. "Monsters aren't the ones you see coming. They're in the sun, the wind, everywhere. They take what they want and vanish, leaving your bones to bake in the sun." Ronan offered her a worn canteen, the metal cool against her scorched lips. The first sip of water seemed to revive more than her body. It pulled a memory of humanity into her clouded mind. She shivered as she drank, though not from the chill, but from relief. I can't go back," she whispered, her voice trembling. "If they catch me again, then you won't go back," Ronan interrupted. "Not while I'm here. But you'll need to move fast. They've already left tracks. And Mara, they won't stop at branding." He lifted the reins and led her through a narrow passage between jagged rocks. Every shadow seemed alive, every crevice a potential threat. Ronan's eyes scanned for tracks, traps, and ambushes. Mara moved silently, a ghost clinging to his side dot as they reached the base of the canyon. A faint whistle echoed from the cliffs above. Ronan froze. Mara's eyes widened. The Iron Spurs were nearby. "Run!" She hissed, and they bolted down the dry creek bed, sand and pebbles skittering under their feet. Ronan's horse galloped beside them, hooves striking sparks from the stones. The wind tore at their clothes, whipping dust into their eyes. A sudden shout pierced the air. Shadowy figures emerged from behind the rocks, 6 men with steel spurs clinking like death approaching. Mara stumbled, but Ronan grabbed her arm and pulled her forward, into the canyon's twisting paths. They ducked into a narrow crevice. Ronan held his breath, counting the seconds. Footsteps echoed past, close enough to burn with heat, yet distant enough that their hearts could keep beating. He pressed Mara against the rock wall, feeling her shaking. "Why did they brand you?" he asked softly. "Why you? They. They make an example," she said. "Those who resist, those who run. They mark to show others it's useless. I'm supposed to warn anyone else who thinks they can escape." Ronan's jaw clenched. He had no time for sentiment. Survival first, vengeance later. The Iron Spurs would pay for every scar they left behind, and Mara would live to see that day. But as the sun dipped completely, darkness fell like a suffocating blanket, and the canyon seemed endless. Mara's presence brought a weight he hadn't anticipated. A strange mixture of fear, sorrow, and something almost fragile, a tether pulling him from the solitude he had always cherished. The night would be long, and the next day, Ronan knew, would demand courage neither of them had tested before. Part 2. The Ghosts of Sundown. Ridge dawn broke like fire over Sundown Ridge, streaking the horizon with shades of orange and blood red. Mara sat beside the smoldering embers of a fire Ronan had built, her knees drawn tightly to her chest. She refused food, staring into the flames as if trying to summon a memory lost to trauma. Ronan watched her silently, cleaning his pistol and checking the horse's harness. He knew the Iron Spurs would be relentless, and the brand on Mara was a beacon that could lead them directly to this canyon. "Do you know why they took you?" he asked finally. Mara shook her head. "Names, records, debts. They leave chaos behind. But I need to know what you saw, who you met." Her lips trembled. I met a man once. He tried to help. But they found us. Killed him. I barely escaped." Her voice broke. "I should be dead." Ronan's eyes hardened. He had no tolerance for the innocent dying at the hands of cowards. And Mara. She had survived something unspeakable, yet she still lived, still fought. He felt a strange pull, a need to protect, and maybe even a need for redemption he had denied himself for years. They moved cautiously through the ridge, every step measured. Ronan scouted ahead, spotting broken branches, faint footprints, and telltale signs of horseshoes in the dust. They weren't far from a settlement, but approaching it meant risking exposure. By noon, they reached a small ghost town. Weathered boards creaked, and the wind whistled through broken windows. It was the perfect hiding place, but it also carried whispers of the past. Mara stepped lightly, avoiding the sharp shards of glass and rusted nails. They entered the remains of what looked like an old saloon. Dust and debris covered the floor. Mara leaned against a wall, feeling its worn wood as if drawing strength from the remnants of life that had once thrived there. "Here," she whispered, "we can rest, but we can't stay long." Ronan nodded. He set traps outside, sharp sticks and tripwires, while Mara watched with wide, haunted eyes. I don't know if I can fight," she admitted. "I've never." "Fighting isn't the only way to survive," Ronan said. "But running without a plan, that's death waiting with a grin. We need a plan." As night fell again, they heard the distant sound of horses. Mara stiffened. Ronan drew his gun, listening. The Iron Spurs had not given up, and their thirst for vengeance matched their cruelty. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the entrance of the saloon, another survivor. A young boy with dirt-streaked cheeks and a broken bow strapped to his back. Mara gasped. You followed me?" The boy shook his head. "I ran from them too. I want revenge." Ronan assessed the boy. He was small, but sharp-eyed. Perhaps he could be an ally, perhaps just a liability. But in the Old West, even fragile lives could turn the tide of battle. They spent the night plotting escape routes, tracing paths over Sundown Ridge, and imagining ways to turn the Iron Spurs' own tactics against them. Mara's resolve grew as she shared stories of the horrors she'd endured. Every word carved a steely edge into her spirit. As dawn approached, Mara made a silent vow. She would not be branded by fear alone. She would reclaim her freedom, and the men who marked her would pay in full. The dawn burned like molten copper over Sundown Ridge, staining the jagged cliffs and dried-out creeks with a fierce, relentless light. Mara crouched by the embers of the fire Ronan had built the night before, her knees pressed to her chest. The wind carried a bitter tang of dust and ash, drifting across the ridge like whispers from the past. Her eyes, dark and wary, traced every shadow, expecting it to move, expecting it to strike. Ronan moved silently, checking the horse's tack and scouring the perimeter. He had grown accustomed to watching, listening, calculating. The canyon and ridge had teeth, and he knew that somewhere among the rocks and canyons, the Iron Spurs were tracking them. The brand on Mara's thigh was more than a mark. It was a beacon for their hunters. "You're quiet," Mara said, her voice low, rasping from thirst and lack of sleep. She didn't lift her gaze. "I thought people in the West liked to talk a lot. Out here, it's mostly dust and blood." Ronan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he tightened the straps on his gun belt, the leather creaking under his fingers. "Quiet keeps you alive out here," he said finally. "Noise draws attention. I've seen too many people die because they wanted to hear themselves speak." Mara's lips twitched, a half smile, bitter and resigned. "I've made noise before. I've screamed. I've begged. It didn't help." Ronan nodded. He understood her entirely. Silence could be armor, but it could also feel like a coffin if you weren't careful. By mid-morning, they began moving down Sundown Ridge, keeping to the narrow paths that twisted between jagged rocks and dry scrub. Mara walked close to Ronan, her hands clenched into fists to keep them from trembling. Each step was deliberate, careful, the soft crunch of gravel beneath their boots echoing in the hollows of the ridge. "Where are we going?" she asked finally, her voice barely above the wind. Ronan glanced back at her, his eyes sharp. "We're looking for a place to hide, and then we're finding a way to fight back. You don't just survive the Iron Spurs by running forever. You have to outsmart them. You have to use the land." Mara's stomach nodded. She had run her whole life, from men, from gangs, from the past she didn't want to remember. To fight, that felt impossible. "And if we can't?" she whispered. "We will," Ronan said firmly. "Because if we don't, we're already dead. And Mara, I don't let people die in my canyon." The canyon twisted sharply, funneling them through a narrow gap that opened into what looked like the ruins of an old town. Weathered boards sagged under the sun, paint flaking like dry skin, and the wind carried the faint scent of rot and dust. Mara paused, stepping lightly over a pile of rubble. "A ghost town," she murmured. "Exactly," Ronan said, scanning the edges with the practiced eye of a man who had survived ambushes and gunfights too many times to count. "Few people come through here. Fewer still stay long. It's perfect for laying low." Mara studied the broken windows, the remnants of a saloon and a toppled wagon. Perfect for hiding. Or dying quietly. Her voice was dry, cynical, but beneath it, a spark of determination flickered. She had survived worse. Ronan found a backroom in the ruined saloon that offered some protection from the wind and potential watchers. He swept the floor, shoving debris aside to make space. "We stay here tonight," he said. "We rest and we plan. No fires. Too easy for them to track." Mara sank against the wall, her fingers tracing the grain of the worn wood as if drawing strength from its age and history. "You always know what to do," she said. I don't even know how I survived yesterday." "You survived because you're alive," Ronan said simply. "And alive is enough for now." Tomorrow we start taking the fight to them. But first, you need to rest." The day dragged on in silence. Mara stared at the crumbling walls, listening to the wind whistling through broken beams. Memories of the Iron Spurs haunted her, their laughter as they branded her, the cold steel pressing against her flesh, the burn that had marked her forever. Her hands trembled despite her best efforts. "Tell me everything," Ronan said after a long while. "I need to know who we're dealing with, Mara. Names, habits, anything you remember." She swallowed, closing her eyes. "They're not like other men," she whispered. They don't think like people. They move in packs. They mark those they catch. Show everyone what happens when you run. I saw a boy once. Tried to help him. He didn't make it. I barely did." Her throat tightened, tears she refused to shed pricking at her eyes. Ronan listened without interruption. There was no judgment, only patience. He had dealt with men like them before, and the best way to fight monsters was to understand them first out by late afternoon. Mara had told him everything she could remember how the gang moved. Their hideouts, the names she had overheard. Each detail gave Ronan a clearer picture, a plan beginning to form in his mind. "Good," he said finally. "Tomorrow we move. I know a path through the cliffs that will let us flank them, catch them when they least expect it. You've survived this long, Mara. We're going to make sure you survive what comes next." Mara nodded, though fear still tightened her chest. She had survived before, yes, but she had never faced them on her own terms. The thought of confrontation made her stomach churn. Yet for the first time, she felt a strange surge of hope, the kind that came from knowing she wasn't alone. Night fell, cold and silent. The ruins seemed almost alive in the moonlight, shadows twisting like specters. Mara and Ronan huddled together for warmth, the wind cutting through the holes in the roof, rustling broken boards. "You're not afraid of them?" Mara asked quietly. "You've never been branded, never." "I've seen men do worse than branding," Ronan said. "I've seen them leave families hanging from trees, barns burned with children inside. Fear's part of survival, Mara. You use it. You don't let it control you." Her eyes closed, exhaustion pulling her down. Yet sleep came reluctantly. Outside, the wind carried the faint sounds of horses and distant shouts. The Iron Spurs were not far. Every shadow seemed alive. Every creak of the wood made her flinch. When she woke, it was to the faintest glow of pre-dawn light. Ronan was already moving, checking the perimeter. "We leave now," he whispered. "The path through the ridge is clear. We can flank them before they even realize we're here." Mara rose, her body stiff from the cold and fear. She tightened the straps on her worn boots and followed him out into the chill morning air. The sun had not yet risen, painting the sky in soft purples and pinks. Each step forward felt like a small victory, a declaration that she would not be a victim any longer. The narrow path along the ridge twisted and turned, dropping steeply into dry gullies and rocky outcrops. Ronan led, Mara just behind, both of them scanning constantly. They reached a rocky plateau that overlooked a small clearing, a perfect vantage point. Below, the Iron Spurs campfires still smoldered, men asleep or tending small fires. "See that?" Ronan whispered. "That's our chance. They think no one could survive the ridge. No one could watch them from here. We'll change that." Mara's heart pounded in her chest. Fear had not vanished, but it was tempered now with determination. For the first time since being branded, she felt the stirring of control. She was no longer running blindly. She had a man by her side and a plan. They crouched in the shadows, waiting, watching, each second stretching like an eternity. The sun began to rise, the golden light spilling over the ridge, revealing the camp below in stark clarity. Ronan glanced at Mara. "You ready?" She nodded, her jaw set, hand steady on her revolver. Ready. This was the moment they had both been preparing for. No more hiding. No more running. The Iron Spurs would soon learn that Mara was no longer the girl they had branded and left for dead. She was something else now, determined, unbroken, and armed with vengeance. And somewhere deep in her chest, Mara felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The dawn over Sundown Ridge was blazing now, but it could not compare to the fire that had ignited in Mara's heart. The ridge burned gold as the sun climbed higher, casting long, jagged shadows across the canyon floor. Mara crouched behind a jagged rock, her revolver gripped tight, the leather of her gloves creaking with tension. Beside her, Ronan knelt, scanning the clearing below where the Iron Spurs were stirring from their campfires. Smoke from the small flames mingled with the dust in the morning air, creating a haze that made every movement below seem ghostly, almost unreal. "You see them?" Mara whispered, her voice dry. She had slept little, her mind restless with memories of what the gang had done to her and what she intended to do to them. Ronan nodded, eyes narrowing. 5 men. Maybe 6. Too confident in their solitude. That's our advantage. They don't expect anyone to watch from here. He pointed to a shallow draw that led down to the clearing. We'll use the rocks to move closer. Keep low, stay quiet. One mistake and we're dead before they even know we're here. Mara swallowed hard. Her thighs still throbbed where the Iron Spurs had branded her. Every step of their plan made the memory sharper, the fire in her chest brighter. She had run long enough. It was time to fight. They moved like shadows, descending carefully along the rocky path. The loose gravel shifted underfoot, threatening to betray their position, but Ronan's steady hand kept Mara silent. She followed instinctively, trust forming like a fragile bridge between them. The camp came into clearer view. A crude circle of wagons surrounded the fires. Men laughed, spat, and tended horses. One of them adjusted a rifle leaning against a wagon, oblivious to the ridge above. Mara's stomach clenched. She had seen these men do unspeakable things, and yet, standing here now, she felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. "Ready?" Ronan asked, whispering. Mara nodded, her jaw tight, fingers steady on the revolver. "Ready." Ronan gave a barely perceptible nod, then rose slightly, signaling Mara to follow. They edged closer, using rocks and fallen timber for cover. The Iron Spurs remained unaware, the morning light glinting off their boots and weapons. Suddenly, a twig snapped under Mara's boot. She froze, heart thudding. One of the men below glanced toward the sound. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Ronan's hand shot out, gripping her shoulder, keeping her down. The man shrugged and returned to his work, oblivious to the 2 shadows poised above him. "Careful," Ronan murmured. "Every step matters." They reached a vantage point directly above the largest fire, the central wagon where the gang leader, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, moved with an air of arrogant authority. Mara's breath caught. This was him, the man who had ordered her capture, the one who had marked her like an animal. Ronan whispered, "We strike fast. We hit the leader first, then create confusion. You aim for his right flank. I'll take the left. We move together." Mara nodded again. Her hands were steady now. She was no longer the trembling survivor. She was a force ready to reclaim herself. They descended into the clearing like ghosts, moving with precision and deadly silence. Mara's pulse was steady, her eyes locked on the leader. The closer they got, the more the adrenaline replaced fear, sharpening every sense. Then it happened. The leader's eyes flicked up. Ronan fired first. A single shot rang out, echoing across the ridge, and the man's body crumpled. Mara fired immediately, the crack of her revolver splitting the morning air. Chaos erupted. The other men scrambled, grabbing rifles, shouting curses. Ronan moved like a shadow, taking down 2 men with careful shots. Mara's heart pounded, but her aim was true. She felt a strange thrill not of killing, but of reclaiming power she had lost for so long. She had survived this long by hiding, by fleeing, but now she was in control. One of the Iron Spurs lunged at her, swinging a knife. Mara ducked instinctively, rolling over the rough ground, and kicked the man squarely in the chest. He stumbled back, groaning. She grabbed a fallen rifle and swung it like a club, forcing him back into the dust. The camp was chaos. Horses neighed, wagons overturned, and smoke from abandoned fires curled into the morning sky. Mara and Ronan moved as one, covering each other, their years of survival instincts converging into a deadly rhythm. At one point, Mara spotted another man aiming directly at her. Without hesitation, she dove behind a wagon, firing blindly. The shot hit true. The man fell with a grunt. Mara's breath came in short bursts. The weight of what she was doing pressed on her chest, but she didn't falter. She couldn't. Ronan appeared beside her, wiping sweat and blood from his brow. "We've got to finish this," he shouted over the din. "They're regrouping." Mara nodded, and together they moved toward the remaining men. Ronan's eyes scanned, catching another man trying to escape with a horse. He fired, grazing the man's shoulder. Mara jumped, kicking the horse, sending it rearing and throwing its rider to the ground. The fight was brutal, fast, and merciless. Mara's muscles screamed, her hands blistered from gripping the revolver, but she felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. The men who had haunted her nightmares, who had branded her, who had taken so much, they were finally within her grasp. Ronan fired again, striking the last 2 men who had tried to flank Mara. The clearing fell silent except for the ragged breathing of survivors and the distant wind through the canyon. Smoke rose from the scattered fires, painting the sky with gray and gold. Mara sank to the ground, trembling. She had done it. They had done it. The Iron Spurs were no more. She felt a surge of triumph mixed with exhaustion. The fight was over, but the aftermath loomed heavy. Ronan approached, kneeling beside her. "Are you hurt?" he asked. I think so," Mara whispered. She looked at her hands, trembling, stained with blood, both theirs and theirs. Her throat was raw from shouting, from fear, from exertion. Yet in that moment, she felt something she hadn't in years: freedom. Ronan helped her to her feet. "You're stronger than you know," he said quietly. "And you're not alone anymore." Mara's eyes searched his, something fragile and human flickering there. She had trusted few in her life, but this man, this lonely, haunted man, had stood by her, guided her, and fought beside her. She had survived the worst, but now she was learning how to survive on her own terms. They checked the camp carefully, ensuring no one else remained alive to pursue them. Among the scattered belongings, Mara found a small notebook, likely belonging to the leader. She flipped through it, reading names, plans, and secrets. It was a treasure trove of information, proof that the Iron Spurs' reach had been extensive. "This," Mara said, holding the notebook, "is everything. We can warn others. We can make sure they never hurt anyone else." Ronan nodded. "And we will. But first, we need to get out of here before anyone else comes looking." As they mounted the horse and began to move back toward the ridge, Mara glanced at the clearing below. The sun was high now, bright and unforgiving, but it did not touch the darkness that lingered in her memories. She had confronted it today, faced it head-on, and survived. Her thigh throbbed where the brand had been, but she no longer felt shame. She felt power, control, and for the first time in years, hope. She had reclaimed herself, and the West, harsh and unforgiving as it was, seemed to stretch before her, with possibilities she hadn't dared imagine. Ronan guided the horse along a narrow path through the cliffs, silent now except for the sound of hooves on gravel and the distant cries of ravens circling the aftermath of the camp. Mara rode beside him, the wind tearing through her dark hair, dust settling on her skin like a baptism of survival. Somewhere deep in her chest, Mara felt a spark she hadn't felt in years, a spark of life, defiance, and determination. She had run for years, had hidden, had been marked, and had been hunted. But now she was free. And Ronan, the solitary man who had wandered the West seeking nothing, had become her anchor, her ally, and perhaps, unknowingly, her friend. The path ahead was uncertain, full of dangers yet unknown, but Mara no longer feared it. She had faced the worst and survived. Whatever came next, she would face it with her head held high, unbroken, unafraid. The West was wide, wild, and ruthless. But Mara Blackwood, once marked, once hunted, once broken, had emerged from Sundown Ridge alive, defiant, and ready for whatever the horizon would throw at her. The sun had barely risen over Red Mesa, a sharp, jagged ridge that cast long shadows across the dusty plain. Mara squinted against the glare, her dark hair whipping around her face in the cold morning wind. Beside her, Ronan tightened the strap on his revolver, scanning the horizon with the practiced vigilance of a man who had seen far too much violence in his life. Behind them, the Iron Spurs remnant scattered men who had escaped the chaos at Sundown Ridge were rumored to be gathering. Mara's stomach twisted at the thought of facing them again, but this time she wasn't the same woman who had been branded, hunted, and terrified. She had survived, and now she carried the knowledge, the fire, and the resolve to finish what had started. "We know where they'll be," Ronan said quietly, pointing toward a cluster of abandoned mining buildings half buried in sand. "They've regrouped here. This is their last stronghold. We take it, we end this." Mara nodded, gripping her revolver tightly. "I'm ready," she whispered. Fear still flickered, but it had been replaced mostly by a burning determination. The brand on her thigh had left a permanent mark, but it no longer defined her. She would reclaim every inch of the freedom they had tried to steal. They rode through the arid terrain, moving with stealth, sticking to dry washes and rocky outcroppings to stay hidden. Each step brought them closer to the mining settlement, closer to the final reckoning. The wind carried the smell of dust, horse sweat, and the faint metallic tang of blood, a reminder of Sundown Ridge and the Iron Spurs' cruelty. As they neared the buildings, Mara's pulse quickened. From her vantage point behind a rusted water tower, she could see 3 men pacing near the largest structure, rifles slung over their shoulders. One of them had a scar running down his cheek, the lieutenant who had helped brand her. Her fingers tightened on the revolver. "Remember the plan," Ronan whispered. "You take the left flank. I'll circle around right. We move fast, hit hard, and give them no chance to escape. Steady, clear your mind, focus." Mara inhaled deeply, trying to calm the storm inside her. She had trained her fear into focus, her terror into resolve. She nodded, and together they split, moving silently through the broken terrain. Ronan crept along the rocks, eyes locked on the men below. He spotted a rifle leaning against a post and a box of ammunition nearby. Mara, moving parallel, kept her revolver raised, scanning for threats. Every heartbeat seemed deafening, every shadow a potential attacker. The first shot came from Mara. A single, precise bullet knocked the lieutenant's rifle from his hands. He turned, eyes widening in shock, and before he could react, Ronan appeared from the right, swinging his gun, striking the nearest man to the ground. Chaos erupted. Sand and dust kicked into the air as the remaining men scrambled. Mara ducked behind a fallen beam, firing with deadly accuracy, her movements controlled, deliberate. The wind carried the screams and curses, mixing them with the creaking of old boards and the distant cries of hawks circling overhead. One man charged Mara, swinging a knife. She sidestepped, firing a quick shot that grazed his shoulder, causing him to collapse into the dust. The world had narrowed to a single rhythm: survive, strike, survive. Her heart pounded, but each breath, each shot, reinforced a clarity she had never felt before. Ronan moved like a shadow, his presence a silent anchor beside her. Together, they were a storm, a force that the Iron Spurs had never anticipated. Mara felt a strange thrill not from killing, but from reclaiming power that had been stolen from her for so long. Every move was precise, a testament to her survival, her determination, and the bond she had forged with Ronan in the fires of Sundown Ridge. As the battle raged, Mara spotted the gang's leader, the man who had ordered her capture, cowering in a corner of the main building. The sight of him made her blood boil. She moved forward, heart hammering, every step fueled by years of fear and suffering. "You," she hissed, her voice low and deadly. The leader's eyes widened as she leveled her revolver. "You marked me, hunted me. Now it ends." He lunged, desperate, but Mara was faster. She fired, hitting him in the shoulder. He fell to the ground, screaming, clutching the wound. Ronan appeared beside her, covering her flank, and together they ensured no one else could intervene. The remaining Iron Spurs either fled or surrendered, their arrogance shattered. Mara stood over the leader, breathing heavily, the weight of years of terror and torment pressing down on her. She looked at the scarred, trembling man and for a moment considered vengeance, but then she remembered the blood, the fire, the endless nights running. She realized she didn't need to destroy him further. The world had already branded him for what he had done. The law would follow, and justice would be served. "Call them off," she said to Ronan. He hesitated, then nodded, holstering his gun. Mara allowed herself a deep breath, feeling the tension in her body begin to loosen. She had faced the men who had marked her, and she had survived. She had reclaimed herself. The settlement was quiet now except for the wind. Mara walked among the ruins, gathering the remnants of the Iron Spurs' belongings: maps, letters, and documents that proved the gang's crimes. She packed them carefully. This evidence would ensure the rest of their network could be brought to justice. Ronan watched her, his expression unreadable. "You did it," he said finally. "They'll never touch you again." Mara looked at him, feeling the full weight of her survival. "No," she said softly. "They won't, and I don't have to be afraid anymore." The sun had climbed higher, burning away the shadows of Red Mesa. Mara removed her boots, wincing at the pain in her feet, and brushed the dust from her clothes. She felt free, not just from the men who had branded her, but from the fear that had defined her life for so long. She had survived, fought, and reclaimed her power. Ronan approached her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We should move," he said. "Others will come looking, and we have to be gone before they do." Mara nodded, and together they rode out of the ruins, leaving behind the scorched remains of the Iron Spurs' stronghold. The wind carried their dust into the endless expanse of the west, a signal of both survival and renewal. As they traveled, Mara finally spoke, her voice carrying a quiet strength. "I used to think freedom was just running, hiding. But it's more than that. It's standing, facing what tried to destroy you, and walking away." Ronan nodded. "You've earned it," he said. "And maybe you've given me something too. I've wandered this west alone for years, never letting anyone close, but I think I was waiting for someone like you." Mara allowed herself a small smile. It was tentative, but genuine. "Then let's keep moving. The west is wide, and we have time." They rode side by side, the sun warm on their backs, the canyon winds whispering through the cliffs. Mara's brand throbbed faintly, a permanent reminder of the horrors she had endured, but it no longer held her captive. She was stronger, sharper, and alive in a way she hadn't been in years. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Mara didn't fear it. The Iron Spurs were gone, justice was at hand, and the horizon stretched before them like a promise. She had faced her past, confronted her tormentors, and survived. She had reclaimed herself. Ronan glanced at her as they rode into the distance. "Where to now?" he asked. Mara looked ahead, the wide expanse of the west glowing in gold and shadow. "Anywhere the wind takes us," she said, her voice steady and calm. "Anywhere we choose." The plains rolled out before them, endless and unforgiving, yet full of possibility. Mara and Ronan rode on, survivors, fighters, and perhaps, in some quiet corner of the west, finally free. The Red Mesa faded behind them, dust and wind swallowing the remnants of the past. Mara's heart was light, her spirit unbroken. And for the first time in years, she felt the unshakable certainty that she would never be branded again, either in body or in soul. As the sun climbed high into the sky, Ronan guided the horse along the narrow trail. Mara beside him, both of them silent but whole. Both of them knowing that the West, wild and relentless as it was, had nothing more to take from them. And so they rode onward, into freedom, into possibility, into a future they would shape together, scarred, strong, and unafraid.